All right, so if you look at the document that we sent out with the 1099 instructions, basically the table of contents takes you right through the steps. We've got setup, and then there's a section about backup withholding. I'm not sure that that's going to affect us at all here in the AS environment or the Seattle environment. If it does, just go in there and read that section. It kind of talks all about it. I'm not going to cover that today because I don't think it's going to affect anybody. The 1099 processing is the main thing, and then obviously the printing. Amy will take care of the electronic filing for our shared environments. All right, so there's a setup, talks about the, it's kind of an overview there. We're going to kind of jump right through it. So let me zoom in just as we can see what's going on here. So under the company corp information, a couple of things have to be done. First of all, the general ledger has to be set up properly. So a couple of things that need to be done. You need to ensure that if you have a client with multiple corporations, that the FEIN number or tax ID number is on each corp. So let's go in here and take a look. Actually, let me log into a demo environment so that I'm not giving away personal information. Okay. So under the General Ledger Company Corp Store menu and hit Corporations, whatever your company is, I'm defaulted into 420 here. All of your corps will show up. Under Edit, you're going to need to have this tax ID number filled in, so whatever it is. If all of your individual corporations are under one tax ID, and Mark, correct me if I'm wrong here, I think you can just take it out of each, make sure it's not in the corporation side and put it on the company side. There's a line there as well. And put it here, and that way it'll cover all the individual corps you may have set up in your system. The reason there may be multiple corporations in our system that aren't in reality true legal entities is if they're trying to print checks separately at each store or something like that. All right, so that's the first step. Company corp store, or the company and corps need to be set up correctly. Secondly is a general ledger accounts. And basically, once you go into the 1099 processing screen, so under accounts payable and 1099 processing, we have everything you need listed here. So the 1099 defaults really has to do with the backup withholding percentages. Again, you can read that section, but I don't think it's going to affect any of us. It can take you right to the vendors, and this is going to be what we'll set up in just a moment. And then also it takes you right into the master account list for your environment. So in this case, it's the demo environment, but if you're in the AS or Seattle libraries, keep in mind this is the master list. In order for your vendor to have 1099able invoices, whatever piece of those invoices gets paid to a GL account has to be flagged as a 1099 account. And you can see there's a column here for 1099, and these are all marked as no. If I put a Y in here, you can see which ones are already marked as 1099able accounts. So a good example of one would be interest, where interest expense is, but say that the note that goes with it may not be. Apparently there's no note payables in this demo environment, but so in the example I used, the principal piece of the note would not be a 1099able amount, but the interest piece would be. Anyway, to change that, and let's put a no in here. No, there was, yeah, that's why there was no note payable. I had the Y in the filter for 1099. So you can see the note piece is no, and then the interest would have been yes. So you would see both of those maybe on one invoice in the system, but one would be 1099able and one would not be. All right, to make a change, and I'm just going to use this account as an example. I'm not going to actually change it. All you do is hit edit, and there's a flag for 1099 eligible, and this is all you have to do. Now keep in mind this is a master account and it's a global change. So if you change it here, it's going to change it for everybody in this environment. So if you change one, especially in the AS or Seattle environment that's not been 1099able before, you may want to send out an email just to ask the AS people if they're using that, and give them a heads up that you're going to have to flag that as a yes, because they may need to drop it from theirs, or you guys work that out manually. Otherwise, that has to be flagged as a yes in order for the AP system to pull the 1099able invoices. So that's the GL piece of the setup. On the vendor side, which is here, I think I'm in here. We'll just use me as an example. If you hit edit and go to page 2, the 1099 code has to be filled out. So something other than NA. What we have to do is have something here all the time. So if it's a non-1099 vendor, we're using the NA field, not applicable. But for 1099 vendors, most of them are going to be NEC for non-employment company, but they could be, interest or rents or any of these others as well. Tax ID number should be here. The W-9 pending date, that's used with the backup withholding thing. The system will capture some of that backup withholding if it's past the pending date, whether or not they've received the W-9. Again, I don't think most of us are not using this, and it's not going to come into play for the common environments. Some of our applications clients may be using that, but so that's the setup on the vendor side. Also note there's an edit 1099 field. We'll come back to that in just a moment. And like I said, feel free to interrupt me with any questions. Okay, so let's kind of move on through the chart here. So we talked about GL and accounts payable vendors, and it goes through and gives you plenty of descriptions on each of those things. There's a section on backup withholdings and an example. All right, so 1099 maintenance. So in this case, it's talking about adding 1099able amounts that have not been processed through the FMS accounts payable system. So what that means is we'll come back over to the vendors, and we'll go find a vendor with a 1099able amount, and hopefully I've got one here. So go into the vendor and hit edit 1099. So once you set up the vendor and the account, maybe it was earlier in the year, the system all throughout the year is going to be tracking those 1099able invoices. So as you can see here, there's 3 that the system's tracked. The reporting year is left blank by default. What that's going to do is anytime you put a year in here, that filters for the summarized invoices. So if, for example, if I put in 2014 and hit enter, there should be nothing there because I haven't summarized those 1099 invoices yet for the 1099 processing. It's just capturing everything that could have been 1099able. So when you leave it blank, it gets all non-summarized invoices under calculated and keyed. You can toggle to backup withholdings as well if you're using that. So what this section is talking about is adding to what's already here. So you can add a default transaction, and basically it's going to be K for keyed, manually keyed. Corporation, you pick whatever corporation it is, the payment date, and the amount. So basically what you're doing is manually adding to the 1099 that would be created and just when it's summarized. So you can see now it's put me over the $600 limit, so I will have a 1099. And you can see the origin here, calculated comes from the system, and anything K is a manual add. And you can go in and edit any of the user keyed lines as well. So you can go back and change it if you mess it up. You can only have one user keyed line per vendor. So this is something your accountants would be, doing, editing the 1099s for their vendors, getting it all correct before we get to the summarization process. In my opinion, it's easier to get it all done here and then do a summary than to try to go in after the summary and fix things, because then if something messes up and you have to re-summarize, you lose all of your changes you did after the fact. So I like doing it here better. Okay? That's really editing the 1099 items there. Notice that you could not edit the actual calculated invoice. You can only edit on a user keyed thing. You can override things after summarization for calculated items. All right, let's move on. So this rest of this manual just talks about, the differences in calculated keyed withholding and all that. It talks about how to do what we just talked about. All right, the next part is the 1099 register report. This can be ran at any time during the year, and it's probably a good idea to go ahead and have your staff run one and send it to your client and say, look, here's what the system thinks that should be 1099, and you guys let us know, which is correct. This is before any summary is done, so it's just going to get any open non-summarized item. So we're going to hit 1099 register, and you just put in the reporting year. If you leave it blank, it's going to leave unassigned 1099s, and that's what you're going to want before the summary. You want anything that's not been assigned. Now, in theory, 1099s have been assigned all through, or 1099 invoices have been assigned every year, so the only thing unassigned would be current year items. That's not going to be the case with this default or this demo environment that I'm in, because there's invoices that are open from all over the place. But just keep that in mind. So we're going to leave that blank. We'll put in the company here, and we'll leave everything else blank to get a full thing. Now you can do details or summary, and you can also filter it by 1099 code, and also by origin if you wanted to just see only manual keyed or something like that. Hit enter and confirm. That'll go to your spool file. So let me pull up the spool file. All right. So hopefully that you guys can see this. Basically what it does is it goes through each 1099 company, corp, and then type. So you've got, whoever this guy is and all of his amounts. He's got pages of stuff. So we can get to the end. Okay, so now here's the ones that I keyed in. So you can see you've got the 2 calculated items plus the keyed item, and I've got a total of 55, 50, 73. So if you're running this before the client gives you any changes, you'll just have all calculated items here most likely, and they'll go through and make sure that everything's correct. There's also some Empower reports that you can run for 1099 vendors. If you just go into the report section, this is in the ASGL, and put in 1099, you can see a list of reports here. And I just ran this one called new 1099 vendor list, and it'll bring up the vendors that are flagged as 1099s, not their amounts necessarily, but just who is flagged as 1099s, and then there'll be a field for their tax ID number. So I sent that to one of our clients today that just said, look, here's who you say is a 1099 vendor, and I've highlighted in yellow the ones that are missing tax ID numbers. We have to have those before we process. And then they can also see if there's anybody else that needs to be added. You can send that in addition to what the system pulls here with this 1099 register. That might be helpful. All right. So that's basically it for the 1099 register, or at least the preliminary one. And then again, it says in the event that the 1099 amounts are not accurate, then you can recalculate. Well, you can go in and change the account number to be a 1099 account, and also the vendor to be a 1099 vendor, and then hit recalculate, which is right here in the middle. And it'll go ahead and add all that in for you, so you don't have to make manual adjustments if those transactions are already in the system. So if you make any changes, you probably want to hit that recalculate first before you do any manual changes. And you can see there's an option here to delete all the keyed 1099 lines. Now be careful, you check that, it's going to delete every keyed one, not just the ones you're trying to get rid of. But you can do it a vendor at a time as well. So between the recalculate and the edit 1099 that we just looked at, you have the opportunity to get your vendors exactly right prior to doing the summary step. And this next page just gives you information on that we just talked about, on that printing. And we talked about recalculating already. It's just a page on that. All right, so then we get to the summary part. And our accountants will be doing this as well. This will be part of the steps that they do. So basically, under summarizing, you just do this process step here, summarize 1099 transactions for calendar year. So what this is going to do, it's going to default to the current year, 2015, which we don't want to summarize for 2015. So be sure you change that to 2014 and put in your company. And you may want to put in your corp depending on how you're doing it. So we'll just do it for one corp. And then, of course, the minimum year-to-date amount, most likely it's going to be $600. Unless your client wants to send it to everybody regardless of the amount. Then you just hit OK and confirm that. And that should put a report in your spool file, as well as adding to where you can go down and look at the 1099 selection and generation. So let's look at our spool file first. Hopefully we got something. Yep. Oh, it keeps growing. All right, so this looks similar to the 1099 register. It's just a summarized version of it. So it should only be the ones that are above that minimum limit that we put. So you've got Chris Nolan, 5,500. The reason the other ones were not showing up here is because they were on the other corporations. So that may be the only one that's in here for 2014. Yeah, that's the only 2014 invoice. So, all right. You can also, once that's done, and you can review that register as well for errors, you can go in and make changes from here as well. Basically, again, it defaults to 2015. If you go to 2014, you'll see the list of companies and corps that are in there. Now, remember, this is going to list everybody for the environment that you're in. So in this case, we've only got 420, but if I opened up the AS library right now, there's 20 of them or so out there. So be real careful that you're only dealing with your individual one. If you want to get rid of it, you have to click on it, hit select to turn it blue, and then hit delete, or to print your miscellaneous 1099s from here. So basically at this point is where our accountants would stop. Once they get their 1099s exactly right, you can go in and edit each record individually. You can see these are all zeros, but if you found me, you can still edit at this point and go in and make other changes if you needed to. But keep in mind that if you have to go back and re-summarize, this stuff will go away. So, and then you have to make those changes again and again. That's why I recommend doing all the fixes before you get to the summary step. But once you get to this point, I think this is where the accountants will email or notify whoever's responsible in the individual offices that they have their which company and corps are ready to go. And then that person will come in here and select these and do print miscellaneous and so on and so forth. You guys can handle that however you want to, but I think that's the process that we used last year. So this takes you through the processing, the summarizing, the 1099 selection and generation that we just looked at. And it gives you what all the buttons do. And then the actual 1099, when they hit print here, it's going to go to their spool file. So that's why we're having one person do all the printing, so it all goes to one spool file. And in the past, some people, I think we set up like a 1099 spool file. I don't know if that's going to happen again or if you still have access to that or not. Again, that's really up to you guys and the processing with Amy. But hitting print there will generate the file, and it shows you how to print. It gives you some pointers on printing the 1099s and how to set the printer up. And then Amy, of course, will take care of creating the IRS file, and will file the magnetic media or the electronic media now, at the proper time. She's also going to handle any other kind of non-miscellaneous 1099. So if you have those like dividends, interest, or whatever, go ahead and put them in the system, like normal. They'll still show up here. The system's only going to print the miscellaneous though. you'll have to notify her of the amounts. You can give her the pieces of the 1099 register that have dividends, interest, or whatever that she needs to generate manually. That's pretty much it for the 1099. It's not a really difficult process. It's just really tedious sometimes with the clients getting all the information in a timely manner. Do any of you guys have any questions at this point? Yes. Okay. Okay. Yeah, he's saying, and I'm repeating this for the recording, he's saying that when they did the 1099 register preliminary before the summary, that it did not pull in some of the rent and things that are not miscellaneous type entries. If that's the case, you may want to do a summary and then do the 1099 register just to be sure. Maybe try it both ways. You can always go in and delete the 1099 summary, and I would recommend doing that so you can go back and work. So the way that you would do that would be to, under the 1099 processing and the selection and generation, we'll go to the right year. So at this point, when we summarized, it gave us a more accurate, supposedly more accurate 1099 register, and then we go in and find out what needs to be changed or added to. You can just go here and make sure it's selected blue. You can drop it as well, but make sure that it's selected, and then you just delete it. And now you can go back. It's gone. You can go back and make all your changes at the vendor level and then re-summarize. Any other questions or comments? Okay, well, if you have anything, just send an email to me. Again, my name is Chris Nolan. My extension is 1405 at the FMS toll-free number. Thanks for attending today.